46 years ago, I asked the question, why do some people walk their talk and some people limp their life? Why do some people do what they say and others don't? And in the research, it pointed to...
I think a lot of who I am right now has been derived from that particular experience of 2 days.
If we don't fill our day with high priority actions that inspire us, our day will fill up with low priority distraction. Imagine there's a conference of 10,000 people, and it's a wealth building conference. And the person who gets up on the stage says, if you buy this product for $49.95, you will be a billionaire in 3 weeks. We're going to run to the back and buy that product. If Warren Buffett was sitting in the front row, do you think he'd run to the back? There are two hormones, ghrelin and leptin. One makes you eat, one makes you stop eating. Anytime you perceive a loss of something you seek, you increase ghrelin to make you want to eat more. And this is what creates eating disorders.
There was this one aspect about me where I used to tell myself and even to other people, just so that I could come across as a wise person, I'm very happy for everybody's success. But deep inside, I was actually jealous about it.
Emotions are polarized feelings. So if you have elation, you're perceiving more positives and negatives. If you're having depression, you're perceiving more negatives than positives. In America, if a man 53 goes and tries to interact with a 6-year-old girl, they label him a pedophile and put him in prison. In some places where countries, according to law, 53-year-old men can marry 6-year-old girls.
It's truly such a pleasure to be doing this podcast. I don't know if you remember this. When you were in India in February for the Breakthrough Experience, I was one of the participants of the 20 people that you did in India. And I think a lot of who I am right now has been derived from that particular experience of 2 days. Because until then, a lot of concepts that I've learned from you have been very intellectual for me to understand. But those 2 days truly helped me embody them. And I'm still in the search of a lot of answers. And I think this podcast is going to be that answer for a lot of questions that I have and a lot of questions that a lot of people have. Right? Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I was looking forward to this. For some reason, you contacted me a few months ago.
Yeah.
And then somehow I didn't know if it slipped through the cracks. I said, what happened to your podcast? And I said, would you follow up and make sure that thing happens? I wanted to make sure we did that. And for some reason, it must have slipped through the cracks. I don't know what happened, but I'm glad we finally got to do it.
To begin with, you've literally dedicated your life to understanding human potential and mastery. And in your journey so far, what's been the single greatest realization about what truly governs a fulfilled life?
Every human being, regardless of age, culture, gender spectrum, has a set of priorities, a set of values, things that are most to least important to them. And this set of priorities, this hierarchy of values, is fingerprint specific, retinal pattern specific, and it determines what they perceive, decide, and act upon. And when some individual lives very congruently and in alignment with what they value most, they maximize their potential. But if they attempt to live by lower priority actions, primarily because of the influence of people around them that they may subordinate to or depend on, they cloud the clarity of what they feel is their calling and their mission. Mm. And they create a friction instead of a fuel. And so the key in mastery is to identify what's really, really, truly intrinsically meaningful and to prioritize their daily actions in such a way that they're fulfilling what's most important in their life, moment by moment.
And how do we identify that?
Because if we don't fill our day with high priority actions that inspire us, our day will fill up with low priority distractions that don't.
Right.
And how do we determine that? Well, 46 years ago, I asked the question, why do some people walk their talk and some people limp their life? Why do some people, do what they say and others don't? And in the research, it pointed to that each individual had a set of priorities and values. As you go up that list of values, it becomes more intrinsic and people more likely to spontaneously act and be efficient and effective at fulfilling it. As they go down the list, they require more external or extrinsic motivation to get them to stay focused. You think of a boy who likes video games, very common today. They don't have to be motivated to play the video games, but they have to be externally motivated to clean their room, do their homework, and finish their chores. So what's intrinsically driven, they spontaneously do. And each of us have a set of priorities that go from intrinsic to extrinsic that we spontaneously do or need motivation to do. Finding that ones that are most intrinsic and prioritizing our actions that way maximizes our potential. Now, how do we determine this? I asked, how do we determine this? Well, back 46 years ago, I devoured everything that was in the literature on the study of axiology, the study of values, at least in English. And I wasn't satisfied by what I was reading because, as David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, stated, there's an is and there's an ought. And many people, when you look for what their values are, they'll tell you what they think it ought to be instead of what it actually is. And I wanted to know what actually does the life of that individual demonstrate, not what they think it should be. Because many people live because they think I should be doing this. I ought to be doing this. I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm not interested in what the external world says, the norms of society say that you're to conform by. I'm interested in what you intrinsically are inspired to do in your life. This is where you excel. So I looked at how people filled their space. There's a study called proxemics. And anytime something is really important to you, you keep it close to you. When something's not important to you, you discard it. So if I gave you something extremely valuable, you carry it around with you. If I gave you something you have absolutely zero value on it, you throw it in the trash. So we keep things close to us, proximal to us, when it's really valuable. So if we look at what you fill your most close space with, that you engage with most, that you are censoring and motoring most, that's close within a foot and a half of you, that tells you what you value most. This could be your children, it could be your computer, it could be your cell phone, it could be your sports equipment if you're a sports specialist. But whatever you fill your most intimate space with, that you keep around you, this is an indicator of what you value. A second indicator is what you spend time on. You find time, you make time, and you spend time on things that are really, really valuable to you, but you run out of time, don't want to spend time on things that have zero value. So what you fill your space with and what you fill your time with is two of the first indicators. The third indicator is what energizes you. When you're doing something that's really high in your value, your energy goes up, your mitochondria fire. When you're doing something low in your value, your energy goes down. And this is a feedback to let you know what's most important to you. Because whatever's highest on your values, your ontological identity revolves around. So if your highest value is your children, you will call yourself a mother. If your highest value is business, you'll call yourself an entrepreneur. My highest value is teaching. I call myself a teacher. Because your identity revolves around what you value most. And so when you're doing something that's highest in value, you feel most authentic, you are most energized because you're being you.
Right. So now I want to understand, how do we know, where do these values come from? Because I remember you speaking about there are voids and these values are a way for us to fill those voids in the first place. So help us understand that a little better.
Yes. From single-celled organisms all the way to humans, there's a mechanism to seek food and to avoid waste, to seek prey and avoid predator. And so even single-celled organisms have endo and exocytosis in order to seek and avoid, which they label kind of good and bad, right? Food is good, toxic waste is bad, predator is bad. So when we start out as a single-celled organism, when the sperm and the egg meet, we make a zygote, single-celled organism. And then it divides and divides and divides around 50-something times until we have our cells at birth. All the way through that development, that same mechanism of seek and avoid is still sitting there. But we have more sophisticated systems that evolve and develop that allow us to seek and avoid. And anything that we label positive and good, we tend to want to consume. Anything we label bad, we want to discard and get rid of and avoid. So anytime we label something and we're conscious of the positives and unconscious of the negatives of, we seek. Anything that we are conscious negatives and unconscious of the positives of, we avoid. It's just a normal biological. By the time we're humans and developed and more adults, we have a subcortical area of the brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala assigns valency to external stimulus and then assigns it and says it's either prey or predator. It's either good or bad. And anytime we do that, in order to label it that way, we have to become conscious of the positives and unconscious of the negatives, or conscious of the negatives and unconscious of the positives. So the moment we do, whatever we're unconscious of, whatever we're ignoring, whatever we're not willing to see, is the voids. So anytime we infatuate with somebody, we're blind to the downsides. Anytime we resent somebody, we're blind to the upside. When we love somebody, we see both sides simultaneously. We're fully conscious. So anything that we're not fully conscious of and expressing love through, that we're seeking or avoiding, represents unconscious emptiness and voids in our life. That's why whenever we judge somebody, we feel empty. And whenever we love somebody, we feel fulfilled. So these voids are judgments that have been accumulated and stored in our hippocampus, which has been called the subconscious mind, neurologically. And it's stored there, and we keep those sitting there to avoid and seek, to protect us from starving and protect us from being eaten by predator, you might say. So anything that we don't have a balanced perspective on is a void stored in our subconscious mind, in our hippocampus, that's attempting to lead us through life until we learn to love that which we've judged. So our voids are our values.
And once we love that, what happens to the voids?
When we think about this, when you first dated somebody, you might have had a little infatuation, and you thought, this one's going to give me at least 51% more positive. Of course, when you date them and you date them for days, weeks, months, you eventually know, well, darn it, there's a new set of pains that come with this one too.
Yes.
You have hugs and slugs, you have things you like and dislike. But eventually you realize, no matter who I'm with, I'm going to have things I like and dislike. So to love somebody is to embrace both of them simultaneously. When you finally realize, yes, I like this and I dislike this, but for some reason I feel love for this man because they have these pairs of opposites, these unique traits. So when we have judgment, we're infatuated, we're blind to the downside. When we resent, we're blind to the upside. Now, if we're highly infatuated, we can hardly sleep at night because these imbalanced ratios of perception occupy space and time in our mind, and we have intrusive thoughts, and we have difficulty sleeping. So insomnia is a feedback to us to let us know we have imbalanced ratios of perception and we're judging and having difficulty sleep. Same thing if we resent somebody. We have intrusive thoughts and it's hard to sleep. So anytime we judge something, we'll create symptomatology in our body and mind to try to let us know we're not seeing the whole, we're not seeing both sides, and we're in survival trying to avoid predator and seek prey instead of in love where we embrace the whole. So our voids, our judgments, indicate and are going to keep leading us through life until we learn to love both sides of it and see that there's two sides to everything. Because the prey that we eat, if we had nothing but prey, we would become overweight and we would be gluttonous. And if we had, and we'd lose fitness. If we had only predator, we'd be starved and emaciated and we'd lose fitness. But if we put both of them together in balance, we maximize our fitness. Maximum fitness, maximum growth and development, maximum awareness is when we embrace both sides of the two sides of life at the same time. The yin and yang, if you want to call it that, or, it's kind of like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. You have the builder, the maintainer, and the destroyer. And in Vishnu's dream, they were building and destroying. And you have to be able to embrace both of them to love the universe, kind of thing.
And I also remember you teaching us saying the maximum growth or the maximum progression in life happens when you have both somebody who supports you and somebody who challenges you. But if this is the actual truth, why do you think human beings always cling towards wanting to be supported more than wanting to be challenged?
The amygdala, that subcortical area in the brain that is involved in survival, in order for us to capture prey, we have to generalize and distort our perceptions to accelerate our adrenaline to capture the prey, or it'll run away from us. Mm. And the same thing when we have predator, we have to distort and generalize things and exaggerate things in order to run away from the predator. So in order to survive, we created these distorting perceptions as a momentary survival strategy to not deal with the stress of starving and being eaten. So we carry these over and we use these in emergencies. We need those behaviors in emergencies. So we want to avoid predator and seek prey to survive. But in normal daily life, we're not in those emergencies. So if we stay there, we're living constantly trying to avoid a pain, seek a pleasure, avoid a negative, seek a positive. And we get addicted to pride and we avoid shame. And we get addicted to fantasy and avoid nightmares. But in actuality, you can't separate these. They're inseparable. They're quantum entangled, if you will. And so the Buddha says the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is the source of human suffering. So we're trying to separate the inseparables. We're trying to divide the indivisibles. We're trying to label the unlabellables, name the inevitables, and polarize the unpolarizables. So majority people who are not living by their highest priority and not inspired spontaneously to act, because of the unfulfillment, they fall in and start to function from their amygdala. They live in survival, not self-actualization, but survival. And as a result of it, they want a pleasure without a pain. And this is why they want a pride without a shame.
Yes, I got the point that people are just obsessed to one side of it. So that brings me to the next question, where if a physical pain is an indicator that something physically is out of alignment, which means emotional pain is also an indicator that something is out of alignment.
I don't want to say that that's out of alignment. That may not be true in all cases, because if you go and work out and you're pumping some iron and doing some working, that can be painful. But you're building a muscle.
Okay.
Learning to appreciate your spouse during difficult times can be painful, but that's part of love. Right. So I don't want to say that avoiding pain, the idea of hedonism, the seeking of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, ahedonism, has not found to be true. There's a thing called eudaimonia that Aristotle described about finding the meaning between the pairs of opposites. The thing that distinguishes us from the animals is we have access to meaning. We can discover the mean, the golden mean between the pairs of opposites. The unity of opposites, as Heraclitus described. And so I don't want to say that searching for pleasure and avoiding pain all your life is going to give you fulfillment, because if so, you could just take heroin and eat sugar all day. But eventually what happens? You end up not doing so well.
Yes.
So there was a utilitarian consequentialism form of morality that was created by Jeremy Bentham, and he sought to give the greatest happiness and the greatest pleasure to people. But then they asked the question, well, how do we create a society like that? And all kind of problems came up. First of all, the consequences of any action. Nobody can really know all the consequences of anybody's action. That's impossible to know because there's an infinite number of, derivatives. And if you did nothing but have pleasure and you say, well, I just want pleasure, then you could say that anybody you are surround yourself that doesn't bring you pleasure, you should eliminate. Well, that could be your own spouse. So the idea of looking for pleasure without pain only is not always the greatest indicator because some great things occur through pains. So I always say that let neither pain nor pleasure interfere with the pursuit of something meaningful and purposeful in life. You're going to have pain and pleasure in the pursuit of it. When I go and work out, if I don't kind of push it to the level where there's a little pain, I don't grow muscle. I don't, if I'm not in a little bit of a challenge in my learning, I don't grow my knowledge. So you need a balance of pleasures and pains in life to be able to maximize human potential. So the searching to avoid all forms of pain and searching for pleasure will be futile anyway. I've asked people by the millions, is there anybody here that doesn't have pleasure and pain? And they all put their hands up. I said, searching for one at the expense of the other will be futile. So
Right.
I think that it's wise to know that they both have a value in life. That's why we have them both. Nociception and placebo. We nocebo and placebo are two mechanisms that we need, and we do it. We use pain and pleasure in sales. We use pain and pleasure in our relationships in order to get what we want. So I think it's wise to just embrace both sides of life. It's way more
Right.
fulfilling to embrace the two sides of life than try to escape. Imagine this, trying to get rid of half of your life and thinking you're going to find love for yourself. You're not going to, getting rid of half of yourself or getting rid of half of somebody else is not going to bring you fulfillment. Learning how to love both sides, that
Right.
brings fulfillment.
This is something that's something I've been asking myself lately, and I keep asking myself, what is the most dominant emotion I feel on a regular basis? And I was quite surprised to understand that it was neither peace nor calmness. There's a little bit of an agitation that's constantly happening on the inside. I have two questions for you. The first one is, what is the most dominant emotion that you feel on a regular basis? And the second one is, how do you kind of find a balance between feeling content and also aspiring to do what you're destined to do?
Well, it's the same answer. They're pairs of opposites. Order and just, no matter what you do, there's always a pair of opposites. The brain is designed for that. All of your senses are dealing with contrast of opposites. If you study the law of sensation, you'll realize it's based on contrast, 2-point discrimination and contrast with vision, and the same with sound. So to try to find a dominant one, peace, without discontent will not happen. You may, whenever you're feeling peace, you're blind to the discontent. Whenever you're feeling discontent, you're blind to the peace. They're both simultaneously there, but you're skewing your perceptions at that moment and becoming unconscious of parts. But maximum growth depends on both. They're both there. You can't escape it. But we have this fantasy with our amygdala that we're going to. And so we think, I want peace. But if you look carefully, if you had peace and you were totally satisfied all the time, you wouldn't push yourself, you wouldn't grow, you wouldn't be thinking of new things, you wouldn't innovate. You need both sides for maximum performance. That's why the growth occurs at the border of all pairs of opposites. So peace and internal conflicts. I was speaking at a peace conference. I've done this same thing at 3 of the peace conferences. I got another one coming up in Bangkok. And I asked people, I was at the Walsall conference at the Milk Abbey in Austria. There was 200 world leaders there, and there were 12 speakers, and I was one of the speakers introducing my methodology for conflict resolution, right? And everybody was talking about, peace without war and pleasure without pain and happiness without sadness, very polarized. And, I was the trickster in the group. And I said, how many of you, I got up on stage and there's 200 people and they're all, dedicated to peace. I said, how many of you have moments of inner peace and have calm? And of course, everybody put their hand up, closed their eyes and smiled like this, it was really quite funny. And I said, great. And the whole room united and said, we have moments of peace. I said, how many of you have moments of internal conflict or turmoil? And all of a sudden, everybody looked at each other and go, we're at a peace conference. We're supposed to pretend like we know what we're doing on peace. We don't want to acknowledge that we have internal conflict. But slowly but surely, people put their hands up. And then I said, I certainly have moments of calm and turmoil. I don't have 100% peace 24 hours a day. I have moments of peace and turmoil. It goes fluctuating throughout the day. And finally, everybody put their hand up and acknowledged and then laughed, because it was almost tragic that they're at a peace conference and have acknowledged that they have internal conflict. So I had them agree that they had moments of calm and moments of turmoil. And everybody agreed to it. I said, do we all agree on that? Yes. I said, now when you find your mate, you find your person that you want to spend your time in life with. How many finally had total peace? And of course, the whole place went into hysterics and laughter, because they realized that no, we have moments of calm and moments of turmoil. And then they realized that there was calm and turmoil there. And I said, fantastic. So in yourself, you have moments of calm and turmoil, and moments when you're with your mate, calm and turmoil. Now, let's say that you are having moments of peace and you end up making love and you have a child. How many would agree that now that you have a child, you'd finally reach total peace? And of course, the place started laughing again, and they said, no. A child sometimes has a cooing, oh, and another time when it's screaming, hollering, you just want to, shake the child, right? I said, so there's calm and there's turmoil now when you have a family. And they all agreed. I said, now when you get with your family and you get with your brother and sister's family at a family reunion, how many would agree that there's nothing but calm and peace? And everybody started laughing, and they go, no, my brother's like my opposite. And we have differences of opinions and stuff. I said, you have calm and turmoil again. Yes. I said, isn't it interesting? Inside yourself, you and your mate, you and your family, and between families, you still get both of these. I said, now, when you go to work and you're with a whole bunch of people with different parts of families, would you agree you have total peace? And they go, no. Or your home association meeting, when you gather in people from your neighborhood, oh, no. Calm and turmoil, agreements and disagreements, in-group and out-group biases. I said, I got a question. At what point does world peace come about without turmoil? Now, one individual has made it. No family's made it. No group of people in a family's done it. At what point do we suddenly have this fantasy that we're going to have one-sided world without turmoil? And I made everybody stop and go, I said, I'm not here to promote a one-sided world. I'm here to teach people how to embrace both sides of life.
Then, when it comes to the spiritual gurus who talk about being in that eternal bliss, what are they actually talking about?
What markets? I've met many gurus, quite a few of them over the years, and maybe on stage they can say that, but if you get them in their real life, they find out they're human beings. They're just human beings. And we sometimes assume that human beings are going to somehow become supernatural in their capacity, but the reality is they're human beings. And many times we find out once we get to know the people, they're human beings. And I think it's a little unfair to mislead people into thinking that you're going to get somehow beyond your normal behavior. I'd rather help people appreciate and love who they are instead of compare themselves to somebody that supposedly reached beyond that. So what I find is there's moments where they have inner calmness, and there's moments when they have inner challenge. And even gurus are human. I mean, I've seen many gurus. And some I got to know personally. Some I was the doctor of and took care of. And behind the scenes, they're human beings. So I don't want to mislead. I certainly, I'm a teacher. And people try to sometimes make me into some sort of guru at times. It's like I'm sort of special or something. And I really don't like that, because I feel what happens is they create a fantasy about who I am, and then they diminish themselves in the process, instead of acknowledge that whatever they see in me, they have within themselves, and they can stand on my shoulders and do something even more amazing than what I get to do. So I think that that can be misleading because it can make people who live in daily life think, well, there's something wrong with me because I'm not in this state all the time. And I met a very, very famous guru from Bangalore, for instance, and had nice chats with this gentleman privately and asked him what are the challenges he's facing. And he had turmoil also. He had turmoil of managing the people. He had turmoil with people in the country, and he had turmoil with managing the money. And he was a human being. So I don't want to give people an impression that you can be one-sided. I think it misleads people and it makes people compare themselves to fantasies and not appreciate their life. So I have a feeling that if you get to know the guru and really get to know the guru, the people around their closest circle, I think if you find out that they're human beings with moments of calm and moments of turmoil.
This actually brings me to another question, which I have been struggling with for quite some time. I know who I am, but the way people perceive me is slightly different from who I truly know who I am. There is a conflict inside of me that says, this is not who I am, this is exactly who I am, but I'm in the process of getting there. I don't want to tell people that this is not. There's a lot of conflict that is going on. How do I deal with something like this?
The more you love both sides of yourself, the more you're willing to expose both sides to yourself to people. But if you're afraid of rejection because of the exposure of the side that you're living in the moral hypocrisy about, then you're trapped. You trap yourself in moral hypocrisies. All our life, our mothers and fathers and preachers and teachers and gurus say, now be nice, don't be mean, be kind, don't be cruel, be positive, don't be negative, be peaceful, don't be wrathful. And they tell you how to be one side. And then a billionth of a second later, they're hypocrites doing something the opposite, just exactly what they said not to do. So we go around with social idealisms, we go around with moral hypocrisies, we go around promoting these things that everybody thinks they want with their amygdala, but not actually going to ever happen. And this is very common in society. And it keeps people kind of under check, the mass consciousness under check, but it's not really the truth about life. And that's why I think the old Taoist idea of the yin and yang has merit, because you have both. We have a sympathetic nervous system for fight or flight. We have a parasympathetic for rest and digest. One's for predator, one's for prey. We're designed for it. We're prepared for it. And if we have those in perfect balance, we have the maximum resilience and adaptability, and heart rate variability shows this. We maximize our potential when those are balanced. If we try to avoid all predator and get nothing but prey, we become juvenilely dependent and we lose our fitness. So we must have both. There's a thing called hormesis. We need a little bit of the challenge in life in order to grow. If you're not filling your day with challenges that inspire you, it's going to fill up with challenges that don't. So it's important to embrace the challenges and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic and the support and the challenge and the pairs of opposites within our own daily life and in our life, and not try to portray a one-sided fantasy, because we mislead people because we don't have it. And if we give them the impression that we do, we just made it more difficult for the people we're supposedly caring about.
Yes.
Because thinking, well, they've got it. What's wrong with me? I don't have it. Why can't I? And then they become addicted to a fantasy, and then they put you on a pedestal, and then they find out you're not that. And then they feel upset and crash. So the more they're addicted, the more they become angered when they find out that you're a human being. And that's very common that people face. That's why I'd rather just be both sides. I don't want you to put me on a pedestal or a pit. Because if you put me on a pedestal, you're going to put me in a pit.
Yes.
If you just realize I'm a human being, I give you now permission to be a human being with both sides. And if I can achieve what I want, you can do the same in your life. I'd rather let them know I'm both-sided. I'm not a nice person. I'm not a mean person. I'm an individual with a set of values. And if you support my values, I can be nice as a pussycat. But if you challenge my values, I can also be mean as a tiger. I'm a human being. I don't try to get rid of half of myself and only be one side. I found that that's unproductive, it's non-sustainable, and it misleads people.
But do you think majority of the world is actually looking for fantasy?
Yes. It's the opium of the masses.
Okay. All right.
They want You can, if somebody goes, I'm going to use this as an analogy. Imagine there's a conference of 10,000 people, and it's a wealth building conference. And the person who gets up on the stage says, if you buy this product for $49.95, you will be a billionaire in 3 weeks. And I have a limited offer, and it's only $49.95. I have a limited offer. There's only 100 of them in the back, and there's 10,000 of you. So whoever gets that first 100 is going to get it, and that's it. And you'll be a billionaire in 3 weeks. Now, if you're ignorant, what are you going to do? You're going to run to the back and buy that product.
Yes,
because I want to be a billionaire in 3 weeks. I want pleasure without pain, without any responsibility. Now, if Warren Buffett was sitting in the front row, do you think he'd run to the back?
no way.
No, he's too intelligent to be swayed by an amygdala seeking an avoidance response. So we're searching for that which is unobtainable. We're trying to avoid that which is unavoidable, which is a source of our suffering. And we get gullible and buy that as a consumer product. We're rushing to get it because we have the fantasy, and then we have the letdown. And just to the degree of our fantasy becomes our nightmare. Now, if somebody goes up and tells people the facts, the majority of people that are wanting the pleasure without a pain are not listening.
Right.
Because they want the pleasure. But Warren Buffett would be sitting there. He'd be going, nodding his head, going, now we're talking. We understand intrinsic value. We understand real value. We understand that it takes work and focus to build the wealth. So the masses are swayed by the rhetorical persuasion and the opium that gives them what they fantasize about. Politicians and some religious leaders sell that. That's how they get votes. But that's not necessarily the truth about how life works. So we have a choice in life. Where do we want to play in the game of life? Do we want to sell the opium and reach the masses? Great. Or do we want to maybe not sell the opium and reach the masters? Everybody's got to play in where they want to play in the game of life. None of them are really right or wrong. They're just there because there's a whole spectrum of people. People that live by their highest values are more masterful. People that try to conform and live in lower values and live by external stimuli, they're more mass consciousness. They're more vulnerable to that opium and more vulnerable to the fantasy of the guru being always enlightened. You know, no matter how much you know, what you don't know is always bigger. Socrates said it really well. Socrates said, I know nothing. Because what he knew was infinitesimal compared to what he didn't know, which was infinite. Because there's a vast universe that we don't know. You only know a small little thing here on the planet. So he was humble, and they called him the wise man, the sage. But really, he was very humble. He says, I know nothing. Because he realized what little he knew compared to what he didn't know. Sometimes people do it in that reverse. A master will see that and honor another master. But the masses will go, well, if he doesn't know anything, I don't want to go there. I want to go to the person who knows everything. So the person that says, I know everything, I'm more enlightened, that sells to the masses. But that means he really knows nothing about himself. Because if he did, he would realize that that's an exaggeration of who he is.
Right. That brings me to the next question of, why do we even have desires? A desire, for example, let's say I've eaten my lunch fully, my stomach is full. I don't have a desire to eat more. But where are these desires actually coming from? And why is that certain desires, no matter even after fulfilling them, people still feel that emptiness on the inside?
That's a great question. There are two hormones, ghrelin and leptin. One makes you eat, one makes you stop eating. Now, what's interesting, when I did the literature research on it, I found something interesting. When you're searching for prey and it escapes you, the perception of loss of something you seek stimulates ghrelin and makes you want to eat more. So in other words, let's say you go to a restaurant And let's say that somebody puts a beautiful Indian meal in front of you, and you're going, ooh, you got your bib on and you're about to dig in. And then they just take it away. They walk away with it. And you go, what are you doing? And they take away what you want. Your desire to find that food and eat that food is stronger than if they never put it in front of you.
Okay.
Because anytime you perceive a loss of something you seek, you increase ghrelin to make you want to eat more. And this is what creates eating disorders, the perception of loss of something you're seeking. Now, if somebody comes along and a predator comes and some person you don't want to have around you comes and sits down with you at the restaurant, you lost your appetite. Because a predator comes around, it activates leptin. Because when you're ready for fight or flight, you don't want to eat. You're ready to fight or flight because you got a predator there. So anytime you perceive the gain of something that challenges you, your eating goes down. Anytime you see a loss of something you're seeking, your eating goes up. And so if you don't see where you gain what you're looking for, you're going to constantly want to eat to fulfill what's empty.
Okay.
So we automatically distort our eating patterns and have eating disorders to the degree of our perceptions that are imbalanced. Now, I ask people in seminars very commonly, raise your hand if you've been very stressed and you either overate, put your hands up, and all the hands go up at times, or underate and put their hands up. And you'll find that there's both of them do both. And I said, now go to a moment when you were stressed and you overate. Yeah. Look in your mind. You'll find out at that moment, you had a perception that you were losing something you were seeking. And they all just kind of look at it and they smile and they go, wow, that's interesting.
Yes.
And if you perceived that you were gaining something you didn't want to have happen. And then all of a sudden you didn't want to eat. So we're built into our amygdala and in our response of survival, these hormonal responses, they're designed as a survival strategy. But when we don't understand that it's all based on our perceptions that's controlling this, we think we have some sort of disorder or whatever, that we're looking for things outside us. But the reality is it's our perception. And desire, our amygdala is the desire center. If you type in amygdala, desire center, you'll see it's the desire center. The amygdala is assigning valency, positive and negative charges, to every stimulus we experience. And if it's positive, it's now prey. If it's negative, it's now predator. And so anything in our life, in any area of our life that we think we seek or avoid, can cause eating disorders if we perceive a loss or a gain of it. So it's our perception that underlies all desire, because we're somehow not seeing both sides. If we see neither positive nor negative, all of our eating disorders stop. But as long as we see a positive and we feel the loss of it, or a negative and feel the gain of it, we're going to have an eating disorder.
Okay, so the more we start to neutralize the perception, imbalance in perception, the desires start to come down. We don't have a lot of desires after that.
Well, think about this. When you are infatuated with somebody, you desire to seek them, don't you?
Yes.
But you're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides.
Correct.
And then over the weeks that pass, you eventually discover the downsides.
Yes.
And so your desire to be with them goes down.
Yes.
And you want to have time with yourself. When you resent somebody, you're conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides. And now you have a desire to stay away from them. But eventually you discover that maybe they actually served you after all. And you start to see the benefits of being with that. And then you desire to see them again. So your ratios of perceptions are what drive all the desires. And if those are perfectly balanced and they're perfectly there, you're poised, you're present, you're empowered. You're not having to seek or avoid. You're just present with them. Anything that you love is present. Anything that you seek, you feel the loss of. Anything you try to avoid, you feel the gain of. So your external world runs you when you have an imbalanced ratio of perceptions. And you run you more masterful when you see both sides. When you have both sides, for a moment, you have that inner peace.
Mm.
But the moment we do, we get promoted to the next illusion that we haven't loved, and we start our turmoil again. And so we're designed to have both of those along our way, or otherwise we're not growing.
So basically, the entire game of life is for us to bring to the neutrality of perceptions and keep going to what else is not neutralized and keep doing that.
That's Will Durant, in his books on philosophy, said that the dialectic, where you have a proposition and an opposite proposition, somebody that argues for something and somebody argues against it. So both people eventually to learn both sides and come to a center, and they both grow knowledge. Debate is where you're trying to convince the other one that you're right and they're wrong. You don't get anywhere that way. You just fight. But if you actually come in and use a dialectic, as Zeno described, you're attempting to learn from them, and you then come back and give it, and you eventually learn that both sides. You learn from both sides. When you have a synthesis of that, you have now the poised state, the unity. And the moment you have this unity, you have this aha, you have this gamma synchronicity in the brain. You have this balance of autonomics. You have an excitation inhibition ratio in the brain that's balanced. You have a poised, present, powerful state for a moment. You're having a moment of enlightenment.
Mm.
The moment you do, you get promoted to the next illusion, the next mystery. Because whatever you know something, see, when you infatuate, you don't know them. When you resent somebody, you don't know them. When you love somebody, you finally know them. The moment you love them, you go on to the next mystery about them that you don't know. And you grow some more, and you get another opportunity to grow in love on a deeper and more profound level. So I wouldn't want it to stop. I wouldn't want it to be, I'm now blitz and I know everything. That's why Einstein said it's wise to live with holy curiosity and to continue your growth. Because how can we ever say we know everything? Because every day people are researching and learning, and they're adding to the mix, and we're growing in our understanding on the micro and the macro, and our knowledge continues to expand. To think that some one person knew it all in the past or in the future is a bit of illusion. It's an ongoing, growing process.
Hypothetically, let's assume all the imbalance in perceptions of a person, they've balanced it out. What happens after that?
In that moment of equanimity, in that moment of objectivity and neutrality, they're poised and they're graced. And they realize when you're infatuated, you want to change you relative to somebody else. When you're resentful, you want to change them relative to you. When you're poised and balanced, you have nothing desire to change. And when you have no desire to change or seek or avoid, and you're just present, you have a moment of grace, if you will, a moment of presence, a moment of enlightenment, if you will, a moment, just a moment. Nobody stays there. Richard M. Book, in his Cosmic Consciousness, studied 43 of the most illuminated people in history and found they only had moments of enlightenment, not full enlightenment 24 hours a day. That's because you're going to end up going to the bathroom somewhere, and so you're going to fart, you're going to pee, you're going to dump, you're a human being. You don't want to live in a fantasy. You're not going to be grounded. Otherwise, life will ground you to teach you that, to humble you.
Right.
So you have a moment of that. And the moment you do, guess what goes on in your brain? What else can I learn? What else can I master? So off you go on the next mystery, because what you know becomes history. What you don't know becomes mystery. And there's no end to the knowing of the mystery. So you're constantly expanding into the awareness, a deeper awareness of greater mystery. Mystery of being. Whatever we know right now about consciousness, I've been studying consciousness for 52 years. And we only know what we know. We have theories and we have things we say, and we've got words and language and stuff like that, but it's still a mystery. Even the greatest scientists and the greatest philosophers and the greatest theologians and the greatest teachers have language that they use that doesn't describe it in fullness. No way. So we're constantly living in the new level of mystery.
Right. And when you were featured in the book The Secret and also the movie, in our session, you had mentioned to us that only a part of what you spoke came on record because it was a lengthier discussion. When I coach people, I start to see this obsession to the outcome. So people are generally obsessed to the outcome and they're like, I really want it right now. One, I want to understand why people have that obsession towards the outcome and what happens when somebody is obsessed towards the outcome.
Okay, this is a great, great one. Because we have the subcortical amygdala and we have the cortical prefrontal cortex, medial prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex is involved in objectivity, strategic planning, and self-governance. The amygdala is interested in desire, survival, avoid pain, seek pleasure. Now, depending on where that individual is in their state of consciousness, depending on what their default mode network is in their brain, which is the standard in which they're functioning. Some people are really amygdala-based. They're in survival all the time. Other people are a little bit more self-actualized, a little bit more stable, and more executive-centered. We call that systems 1 and systems 2 thinking. Systems 1 thinking is that you feel and emote before you think. And systems 2 is you think before you react. Very few people think before they react and are reasonable. Most people are emotive and responsive to external stimuli before they think. Some never even think. They just respond and do what people tell them. Now, if all of a sudden you're setting a goal, if the goal is a pleasure without a pain, a positive without a negative, a fantasy without a nightmare, you don't have an objective. You have a fantasy. And so they become obsessed because it's an intrusive thought. Just like if you're infatuated, you can't get them out of your mind. So they become obsessed with a fantasy of a pleasure without a pain and avoiding a pain without a pleasure. And so they don't really have an objective. They have a fantasy that has not been thought through very well. Let's put it that way. So they come to you with a fantasy. I want a billionaire in the next 6 months or something, or I want a big company like Amazon, or something. They tell you these fantasies, but they're not likely to ever obtain them with a fantasy because there's no strategy. There's no game plan, you might say, to ever achieve it. When somebody's in their executive center, their medial prefrontal cortex, they have foresight. They literally have connections to the visual cortex, and they can have and see and anticipate with foresight and mitigate risks, strategically plan, think out exactly the action steps, and calm down the fantasy by being aware of the challenges that are going to be there along the way to get the goal. And they now have a realistic understanding of what they're going to face. Here are the downsides, and here's how I'm going to mitigate them. Here's the upsides, and here's how I've calmed them. And they have self-governance, and they're more centered and more objective. And they're not elated. They're not manic. They're not in fantasy. They have clear pathways, and you give them the information on how to do it, and they just take it and run with it. And so you have a gradation of people that are run by their amygdala, trying to avoid that which is unavoidable and trying to seek that which is unobtainable. And you got others halfway between and 3/4 of the way between. You have others that are really, really understand that there's going to be challenges. I remember I was coming down. I used to live in Trump Tower, and I lived right underneath the Donald, crazy Donald. And we were coming down together with my wife, and we were chatting because I knew Donald. And we came down, and we went in the lobby, and Donald had a dozen people waiting in the lobby for him. And my wife and I were just going to go and have some sushi just a couple blocks away. So we walked out together with Donald and his team, came up to the street corner there and walked across the street. And we were listening to the conversation Donald was having with his people. And he was building the Hudson River Project, where there's a whole bunch of high-rise condominiums being built down now the Hudson River. And so he had people there, and one of the individuals was a specialist in geology to know exactly what is the land and geological structures that are going to be underneath when they build the foundation 10 to 12 stories underground. What are they going to run into? What's the rock formation, everything else? And he said, I need to know everything about that and what we're going to run into so we can anticipate with our planning how long it's going to take and how long it's going to take to drill and dig. And he had another person that was a specialist on Indian reservations. Because in America, sometimes if you go and build, you have to make sure there's no Indian reservation restrictions where they can come back and say, well, you're now destroying our sacred site where we buried people, and it stops the entire construction.
Okay.
So he had to have an Indian reservation specialist with him. And then he had to have a land ownership, because when you build into the sky, there's sky ownership. Not just land, but you have to own and you have to pay for sky. So you need to make sure you know all the laws and how high you can do and how much you have to pay for the sky ownership. So he had specialists thinking of everything that could go wrong. They had another person that was in the real estate, because sometimes people refuse to sell the property that they need to condemn to build the building. Mm. So he needs to find out what their motives are and be able to negotiate with them to sell the land, to get the land. So he had specialists taking care of every possible anticipated problem that they could think of. It wasn't positive thinking. It wasn't fantasy thinking. It was real practical grounded information to try to solve the problems in order to build a building and a series of buildings. So many people want to hold on to a fantasy, don't want to look at what challenges they have in advance, get slapped because they didn't do that foresight. They're now caught in hindsight. Then they all of a sudden go, if I knew I was going to deal with this, I wouldn't even have started, because they were going after a fantasy that's not obtainable. And that all those gradations between people are either objective or living in desire, fantasy. So finding something that you're really inspired by, that you spontaneously want to do, that you're willing to embrace the pains and pleasures in, those people achieve. The people that just want a pleasure without a pain, the second the pains come that are inevitable, they want to give up.
Right. And also, I think, especially after the breakthrough experience, I think the biggest breakthrough I had, one was with respect to my father. I healed that relationship once and for all, which I had been carrying the resentment. The second thing is, I started to understand that I was bullshitting to myself on a lot of levels. And after the breakthrough experience, I've been asking myself, what is that you're bullshitting to yourself? And that kind of gave me a sense of freedom, number one, and helped me understand myself better. There was this one aspect about me where I used to tell myself and even to other people, just so that I could come across as a wise person, oh, I'm very happy for everybody's success. But deep inside, I was actually jealous about it. And I acknowledged that about me, and I found a lot of peace after that. I'd like to understand this. Why do people feel jealous?
Let's say you meet a guy that you are infatuated with, and then all of a sudden you really want to date this guy, because you haven't learned all the downsides yet. You just think, oh, this one's going to give me 51%. Then all of a sudden another woman comes along and starts flirting with him. And she could possibly get him and take him away from you. Well, as long as you're infatuated, and you're going to fear the loss of him. So now you're going to be jealous of that person because they may have something you don't that might capture his attention over you. Now, if all of a sudden you meet somebody and you don't feel in any way threatened by their abilities, and you don't think he's going to be interested, you don't have jealousy about them.
Yes.
I had a fun thing happen. My wife passed away 20 years ago. When she was alive, she's a pretty empowered, pretty strong woman. I can't say I ever saw her jealous around any woman I'd been with. Anybody I was talking to, I never saw except one. And I was on the ship that I live on. You've been on the world. I was on the ship, and one of the Duchess, very beautiful woman, a Duchess, came onto the ship and listened to me lecture, and then asked if she could go to lunch with me or dinner with me. And my wife and I were sitting there having lunch, and she comes up to me and talks to me, doesn't look at my wife, and says, is there any possible way we could get together and have a conversation? Maybe I could take you to lunch or dinner. I'd like to do that. And I looked over at my wife and I said, honey, would you like to maybe do a lunch or dinner with the Duchess? And then the Duchess, before my wife could speak, the Duchess said, I have no interest in meeting with your wife. I only want to talk to you. My wife grew nails about 1.5 inches long. And it was really quite funny. I'd never seen her that way. But the Duchess was an attractive woman, had a lot of influence and power. So my wife, for the first time I'd seen it in all the years we were together, thought, this is a threat, because this person could take my husband's attention away from me. Now, the truth is, I wasn't interested in the Duchess. She was an attractive woman, but that's not, I would take my wife over her any day. But my wife, for just a moment, reacted because she thought that could be a threat. Now, if a 94-year-old woman that was all withered and everything else and out of shape came up to me and said, "Can I go to lunch and dinner?" She'd say, "Fine, go to lunch and dinner." So whenever we perceive that something could go and take away what we're desiring, pray that we want food. That's like going after and about to get to bite to eat at a restaurant, and somebody at the next table reaches over and grabs your food. And you would be, well, hey, wait a minute. And they're taking something away from you that you want. So you'd be angry and jealous about it. So jealousy is a normal biological mechanism. Whenever we subordinate and think somebody has something we don't, and we're too humble to admit what we see in them is inside us. Now, if I took my wife and I said, what exactly is it about this Duchess that you think she has that you don't? And I'd identify it and then find out where she has it in her own form, where she's not intimidated by it, and she's not too humble to admit that she has it, she would not have had any jealousies at all. I only saw her once, and all the time I was with her, that's the only time I ever saw her jealous. She had no problem with me talking to anybody, normally.
Just like how jealousy is an uncomfortable emotion, there are a bunch of uncomfortable or unpleasant emotions. Are they all indicators of something that we are not seeing in ourselves at this point of time?
Yes.
Okay.
Every emotion is an imbalanced ratio of perception. Every emotion is an imbalanced ratio of perception. And there's a distinction between emotions and feelings. So emotions are polarized feelings. So if you have elation, you're perceiving more positives and negatives. If you're having depression, you're perceiving more negatives than positives. If you're infatuated, more positives, negatives. Resentful, more negatives than positives. Pride, more positives, negatives in yourself. Shame, more negatives than positives in yourself. Anger, you're assuming that the thing that's making the anger is not living up to what you expect, and you're assuming it's causing more pain than pleasure, more negatives than positives. All emotions, all affections, all the passions are imbalanced ratios of perceptions in some degree or extreme. Now, if you were to balance them, you wouldn't lose feelings, but you'd create what I call transcendental feelings. You'd have true love, because love is a synthesis and synchronicity of these polarized emotions. Most people think that infatuation is love. That's not what love is. Love is the embracing of both sides of an individual, of opposites, complementary opposites at the same moment. When you're with your husband, and you've been together many years now, you know immediately when you see them, these are the things I like, these are the things I dislike. You don't have to be reminded of them. You know they're both there, but you still love them with both sides. So love is when you embrace both sides simultaneously and you have full conscious awareness. You have simultaneous contrast, and you have a unity of opposites, and you have the feelings of the two polarities that were the two emotions joined together at the same time. And now you have a synthesized transcendent feeling. So it's not an emotion because it's polarized. Emotions make you seek or avoid. Love makes you present, poised. There's no seeking or avoiding. There's no fear of loss, no fear of gain. It's just the presence of the individual. And I've demonstrated that in the breakthrough for decades. The same thing for true grace. When somebody does something we like, we go, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's sort of a fake gratitude. When people don't do what we like, we go, oh, we say the opposite of gratitude. We're ungrateful for that. But true grace is when you realize that people do things you like and dislike. And that's what you love about somebody. So there are transcendental feelings which are synthesized, and there are polarized emotions which are polarized. And polarized emotions are imbalanced ratios of perception, and synthesized feelings are balanced ratios of perception. So when I do the Demartini method in the breakthrough experience, and I have people complete the process, and then sit in the chairs and talk to people and open their heart to somebody, In that moment, there's thank you. I love you. I'm inspired by by the dynamic that I've learned from your presence. I'm enthused about what this will give me. Thank you. I'm certain about this, and I feel your presence. Those transcendental feelings are authenticity. You're in a moment of authenticity, a moment of equanimity, a moment of enlightenment, a moment of grace. Those feelings are profound and healing. Polarized emotions are what create all the symptoms in our life. All the illnesses we have are all a result of the polarized emotions of survival. That's why if we say the more polarized we are, the more we feel the loss of that which we seek, and the more we feel the fear of gain of that which we avoid. So we're living in fear, we're living in fantasy and nightmares whenever we polarize, and we're living in grace whenever we synthesize. And so our higher cortical brain is trying to integrate and synthesize. It's a synthesis. It's an integration. The medial prefrontal cortex, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex is the integrative center, according to Scientific American, October of 2022. It's the integrative center trying to unify the pairs of opposites. But the amygdala tries to separate them because it wants a pleasure without a pain and wants to avoid the predator and prey. It wants to separate the pleasure and the pain. So we divide ourselves with our amygdala, we unify ourselves in our executive center.
And previously, you had mentioned that some people are systems 1, some people are systems 2. Is it a default design, or is it got something to do with parenting and how they grew up? Some people are amygdala driven and some people are prefrontal cortex driven.
Well, the summation of all the perceptions you've had in your life is your life. So if you have been, let's say you've been raised by a family, and the family says now, be kind, don't be cruel, be positive, don't be negative, be one-sided. Now, when you think you're being one-sided, you'll be proud of yourself. When you think you're the opposite of that, you'll be ashamed of yourself. So now when you're proud, you're inauthentic. And now when you're ashamed, you're inauthentic because you're polarized. And now you can get addicted to one, and they get addicted to pride and they get frightened of shame. So they basically now create a facade, an imposter syndrome to survive that dynamic. If somebody told you when you were a child that society is going to attempt to impose on you a moral hypocrisy, a morality that you're going to try to do, but you're not possibly going to live. Nobody can be one-sided. If I asked you if I was to come up to you and said, you're always positive, never negative, you're always kind, never cruel, you're always giving, never taking, always peaceful, never wrathful, you would immediately go, not really. No. And if I said the opposite, you're always mean, you're never nice, you would go, no. But if I said to you, sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel, sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative, you would immediately go, yep, that's true. We know with certainty that we're both-sided, but we get caught in a moral hypocrisy that makes us try to think we're supposed to be one-sided. Now, the more we try to live in that moral hypocrisy, the more internal conflict we have between our true nature and what we think we're supposed to do. This is the is, our true nature, versus the ought. And as long as the people that live by oughts and are frightened of being rejected by society, and the people are trying to conform to fantasies, they're amygdala systems 1 driven individuals mostly. They're less aware, less reflective. They're more reflexive than they are reflective. They're more reactive than they are proactive. And they basically run from external circumstances and other people's opinions instead of their own. That's why I said in the movie The Secret, when the voice and the vision on the inside is louder than all opinions on the outside, you begin to master your life.
Yes. And let's say there are two individuals, very, very similar individuals, put in the same situation when they were growing up. What is the probability that their perception about the situation is very similar?
Well, if you have two people in a family, they're going to play complementary opposites more likely. If you have a brother or sister, if you have a family of more than one, there's somebody that plays out your opposite role because the summation of all the values in the family cancel each other out. So if you're very driven and goal-oriented and focused, they go with the flow and just take it easy. And if you're really wanting to get ahead in business and finance, they're like, well, just, a family and socializing and stuff and partying or whatever. These pairs of opposites are what make up society, because in society, you need the full spectrum. So in the family dynamic, you have this spectrum. And if you try to get everybody one-sided, which I've seen some Indian families try to get everybody to be an engineer, or everybody to be a doctor or something, it'll backfire. Because even if they become a doctor, they eventually stop doing that, or they're not fulfilled doing that. So each individual has a unique hierarchy of values, and the summation of those values have to counterbalance each other. There's a law called the law of heuristic escalation in society, that anytime an individual tries to impose an ideal, a set of values onto society, somebody with an equal and opposite set of values comes to the surface to counterbalance it. It's like a yin and yang again. And that's why we have support and challenge and peace and war, because these must have the balancing act. Because if we get a dominant, we get a monopoly, nature has a way of neutralizing monopolies, anti-monopoly mechanisms. So our families are designed to have complementary opposites. If you have a brother and sister, you can count on them having different values than you. And so when they grow up, they're going to have different trajectories. I full-time travel. I live on my ship, or I live in hotels. I mean, in a plane, a hotel, or on my ship sailing. So I'm full-time traveling. I've traveled 21 million miles on jets, and I've done 2 million miles on sailing. I travel a lot. My sister hardly travels and hardly leaves home. Doesn't go anywhere. Now, am I right and she wrong? Is she right? I'm wrong? It's not a moral issue. It's a balancing act. In genetics, they found out that the more people are nomadic and travel, there's somebody in the family that's homebound, because in order to maximize genetic expression, they need both. They need what they call internal, kind of almost ancestral genetics, and they need exsexual genetics. So diversity, to make sure that genetic fitness is maximized by options. So some stay within the family and never go anywhere. Some are travelers and never stay around. And that is necessary in the overall evolutionary thing. And they have to have different sets of values. These have to be more entrepreneur-like, and these have to be more entrepreneur-like. These people work for other people and stay secure. These people have other people working for them, and they go out and take risks. That's normal inside every family dynamic and in the collective society in order to create jobs and to create social structure.
Okay, in this case, let's assume hypothetically your sister was adopted by a different family. Would she have still exhibited the same qualities as she's exhibiting right now?
The moment you get back in that family dynamic, you have shifts sometimes in value systems based on the new group of people you are.
Okay.
Within that value system, now they may shift accordingly. It depends on what that value system of that new group is.
Okay.
So just like, think about this. Your kids, right? They can just drive you crazy at home sometimes, but they can go and spend time at a friend's house, and the parents say, "Oh, your kids are so lovely. I just love having your kids here." And you go, "What? My kids? You got to be joking." But in that dynamic, they play a different persona.
Right.
Now, let me elaborate on something that's really quite funny. I was in the South Pacific, sailing the South Pacific, near Bora Bora and Tahiti and these places. And outside my balcony from my ship, I looked down and I saw octopuses, lots of octopuses. And octopuses are cephalopods. They have a head and a bunch of legs. And they're masters of camouflage. Masters of camouflage. So they can go into the sand and join into the sand, and it looks like they're just sand and rock. They can go in to get seaweed and turn a different color, and they can look like seaweed. They can go into coral and look just like coral. They're camouflages. And they do that in order to capture prey. They have to not be visible, or to avoid predator, not be visible. So they use camouflage in order to capture prey for food and to avoid predator being eaten, because they don't want to starve and they don't want to be eaten. Well, every one of us do the same thing. We have a camouflage. It's called the imposter syndrome, the persona, the mask, the facades that we wear, because we put on one mask if we're around people we're infatuated with.
Yes.
And we're kind and gentle, and we only say positive things, and we're so gentle, and we listen. The second around somebody we dislike and resent, we can put on a completely different camouflage and be aggressive and assertive and demanding.
Yes.
So we can be introverted when we're around people that we look up to. We can be extroverted when we look down on people. We can listen but hardly speak. or we can speak and hardly listen. We have the same camouflaging mechanisms in our imposter personas that we wear in social settings. And therefore, the labels we give people are not really who they are. They're just labels in the context that they're sitting in.
Right. You often speak about how everything in life is on the way and nothing is in the way. So, when we understand a situation, and I'm going through a turmoil of emotions and a situation that I probably did not want for it to happen in my life, once I've finished that and I'm on the other side, it's very easy for me to understand this. But when somebody is going through it, how do they realize that this is also for their highest good?
Every event is neutral until somebody projects their evaluation on it and assigns a valency of positive or negative to it. Let me give you an example. In America, if a man, 53, goes and tries to interact with a 6-year-old girl, they label him a pedophile and put him in prison. In some places where countries, according to Sharia law, 53-year-old men can marry 6-year-old girls. It's legal and it's honored because done the same thing, married a 6-year-old and then started making love with her when she was 9. Now, in one country, it was considered honored, the other one is dishonored. The event is neutral until somebody with a value system, mostly indoctrinated by the society around them, labels it. Now, it's neither good or evil until somebody puts it into a context. And actually, the consequences of any action, nobody knows the consequences of any action. They're infinite in possibility, and they always come out balanced between positive and negatives if we look carefully. So all events are neutral until somebody comes in there with a biased interpretation, and they label it good or bad. Now, I worked with a woman recently that actually had a sexual interaction with a cousin, did not even know that it was bad until she turned 16 years old, and then it got exposed, and then all of a sudden it was bad. So she did not think of it as a bad thing until later on in her life. And now it's bad. So we have context around things, and we judge things according to those contexts. But actually, it's neutral. So if we have this idea that this is bad and it happens, we think we've been traumatized. If we think it's good and it happens, we think we've been ecstatic. The torture or the ecstasy is based on what we assign to it, the valency we assign to it. So if I take something, and I get to work with people that have been traumatized by all kinds of things, they think, that's the label. And I ask them, what's the upside? What's the benefit? So let me give you an example. Let me give you a real example. So I get contacted by a gentleman who is in Africa, and he owns a big company, a lot of stores. He's driving down the highway. Suddenly, as he's driving down the freeway, there's a busy traffic in the freeway, 4 cars comes up to him, 2 on the side, 2 in front and back. They stop, freeze him in the middle, come out with machine guns, knock out his window, take him, cover him with a head thing. They were covered in their heads, stuck him in a trunk, and then drove off and left his car in the freeway. Now, they drove him for about 5 hours out into the middle of nowhere in the country. And then they ransomed millions of dollars they wanted and threatened to kill his family if he didn't pay. Now, I asked him, good. At the moment, now, the therapist that he was going to said, oh, this is a post-traumatic stress. They gave him a label. That's terrible. Oh, that must have been frightening and all that stuff. Well, somehow he got led to me, and I asked him, okay, go to the moment when you felt most threatened. He said, well, when they stuck me in the trunk, I almost peed in my pants. I almost pooed in my pants. I felt the fumes of the gas. I felt constrained because I was tied and shackled. And I said, at that moment, your mind will dissociate from that and create an alternate reality a dissociative alternate reality to counterbalance it called an anti-memory. And so I said, go to the moment when you felt constrained. And his mind went out into a field, walking and kind of running through a field with butterflies and birds in his mind. And at the moment you had fumigation, what did your mind do? And said, well, imagine fresh air. And I said, and then you thought that your wife is going to be killed and kids are going to be killed. What did you do? I imagined myself holding hands with them in the field, free, safe. His mind created an anti-memory in order to stabilize his brain. And I made him aware that at the moment he was thinking he was having trauma, where was the other side? And I brought those together until he had a tear of gratitude for each of the frames of those experiences. When he was done, it was 2 hours and 15 minutes of work. There was no trauma. And when I got through, I said, now, what's the benefit of them putting you in the trunk and doing this? And at first he goes, I don't know. I said, let's look. What's the upsides to it? And then he said, during the 2 weeks I was away, all the people in my company that I've been trying to push to get more productive realized they don't know if I'm going to come back. They better get up and do their job. And they rose to the occasion, and my business produced more than when I was normally there. And all these people stepped up and took on accountability that I've been trying to get to be accountable, but nothing was working. They stepped up and became accountable. So my business actually made more money during those 2 to 3 weeks than the ransom cost. And he says, and I was sitting on the edge in my business and taking my wife and kids for granted, and sometimes feeling that they're distracting me from what I want to do because I'm focused on business. And I knew I was on the edge, and I knew there were discussions that maybe I am going to end up in a divorce and have a major calamity with economics and business. But when this thing happened, I really realized how much I cared about my kids and family. And when I finally was released after paying the ransom and walked and finally made it back into the city and finally got back with my family, I never felt more appreciation, love for my family than I've had even before I got married. And now I'm at home. My business is running on its own. We're making more money than we did. The amount that I had to pay was an insignificant amount compared to what it's generating now. I'm being time with my family. I'm now lost weight because they didn't feed me. I brought my blood pressure down. I'm now more doing yoga and breathing and exercise and eating better. I'm now with my family. We're now being time together and appreciating it. My business has been delegated more effectively. He said, I almost want to thank the people for coming and ransoming me. And I said, now we're making progress. Because anything that you can't say thank you for is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for is fuel. And trauma is not what happens to us. Trauma is what we choose to perceive about the event because we chose not to see the upsides and benefits and how it's serving us. And if we don't take the time to ask how specifically is whatever is happening helping me fulfill what's most meaningful to me, we're not being most resourceful in finding out how to master our life. So if we can prioritize our actions and stick into the highest priority things and dedicate to what's highest and delegate other lower priority things to people that would love to do that. So we give job opportunities and help the economy and free ourselves to do what's inspiring. And we don't prioritize our perceptions by whatever's happening to us. How is it helping us get what we want? We're not mastering our perceptions and because we have control over perceptions and decisions and actions in life. And the decision we make is, do I prioritize perception? Do I prioritize action? Do I prioritize both? That's mastery of life. So it's not what happens. It's the perception of what happens. If I was to take your hand and put it on a table and then take a sledgehammer and slam that thumb and you go, what? Why did you do that? That's terrible. Wow, that hurts. But if I was to come to you and I said, I'm going to give you $10 billion. I'm going to give you the house of your dreams. You're single. I'm going to give you the man of your dreams. All I have to do is slam your thumb, and for about 10 days, it'll be a little sore, and it'll be completely normal in 10 days. But for 10 days, you'll have discomfort. but I'm going to give you 10 billion plus the house and plus the guy of your dreams, plus the car of your dreams, and more awareness, if I could put that in with a chip or something. I bet that everybody would say, slam away. Because the associations you make now with the thumb make that thumb slamming not as painful, it's now pleasurable because now the advantages are outweighing the disadvantages. So if we choose to see disadvantage, we become traumatized. If we choose to see the advantages, once the advantages are equal or more than the disadvantage, we're no longer traumatized.
This brings me to two questions. The first one is, all the lessons that this person learned, had he already had been aware of all of this, would this incident have not happened? That is number one. The second question is, this is such a beautiful orchestration of his life. Who orchestrates all of this? The divine intelligence. Who does all of this? How does this happen?
Well, Carl Jung, the psychologist, said, whatever we run away from, we run into. And so if we're with our amygdala, and we're trying to run away from something and trying to run to the other side, that which we seek becomes unobtainable, and that which we try to avoid becomes unavoidable. So nature has pairs of opposites. Sometimes our goals don't match that pair of opposites. They're fantasies. If our goals match the pair of opposites, we realize that what we expect out of life is what happens in life. And we're now confident that what we can achieve is obtainable. But if we're under a fantasy that we're supposed to get a one-sided world and the other one keeps slamming us, we're going to think some outside circumstances is controlling our life because we keep going for one thing and free will doesn't match predestination. Right? Because we feel, well, that must have happened. That was part of destiny. So when we balance our perception, free will and predestination, necessity and contingency, and determinism and indeterminism become one. There's no paradox. So to say that there's a universal intelligence, a divine intelligence, a divine perfection, okay, that's a valid interpretation possibly, because we can't prove or disprove that. To say that we're participating in a dynamic and there's rules and laws of the universe that we're following and laws of human psychology that we're following is also true. So I can't prove or disprove the one, but I can certainly demonstrate the one that's based on the human behavior. And it's probably a combination of the two.
Okay. This brings me to the last couple of questions. The first question I want to ask you is, when somebody knows what they want, right? They're in the pursuit of getting there, but they still self-sabotage themselves or the process of getting there. What creates this self-sabotage?
Well, I've been doing human behavior for 52 years. I've never seen real self-sabotage. That's the term that's used in the self-help movement for people who don't know what's really important to them, but think they know. Because when something's really important to them, they achieve it. When something they think is important to them, but it's not as important as other things, and it's not highest in priority, then they keep going and defaulting back to what is priority, and then they keep expecting that which is not priority. For instance, I've had people come to my programs and I've stood in front of 10,000 people and said, how many of you want to be financially independent? Every hand goes up. Some people put two hands. Some people stick their leg in the air. And they all go, yes, I want to be financially independent. And I go, really? Let's find out. And I said, how many of you are financially independent? Most of the hands go down. Most of them go down. A small percentage of people leave their hand up. And even that's one, I wonder if that's always true. And I said, so there's a handful of people that are actually claiming to be financially independent, where their passive income exceeds their active income. And there's a whole lot of people, majority of people, that fantasize about being financially independent, but no matter what, they don't seem to get ahead financially. Now, I asked them to pull out a piece of paper, and I imagine I gave them $10 million. Here's $10 million on a little pallet. You have 1 minute to write down the 10 things you're going to do with that $10 million. So I'm going to give you $10 million. You have 1 minute to write down the 10 things you're going to do with that money when you get it. And I said, and on your mark, get set, go. Write those 10 things, go. And 60 seconds later, I say, stop. Now hand that sheet of paper to the person next to you. And then when you receive that piece of paper, calculate how much of the money that they had has been spent on consumables that depreciate in value, that no longer generate income. And between 20 and 80% of the money was spent on consumables. They got that house, they got that car, they got that trip, they got that new, clothes. They bought things that went down in value, not up. If somebody is going to buy things and has an urgency to buy things that are consumables that depreciate in value more than appreciate in value, they're not going to become financially independent. They confuse lifestyle with financial independence. Most people think if I'm financially independent, I can have the lifestyle I want. But the reality is people that are focused on the lifestyle and not actually growing wealth and buying assets and deferring gratification, they're not going to become financially independent. Then I found that there's a handful of people, just a handful, that actually took the $10 million and invested it into quality companies or quality investments that appreciate in value so they could then turn it into 20 million and then only live on 1% to 2% of it. And then it would be 40 million and live on 1% to 2% on it. And it would be 80 million and then live on 1% to 2% of it. And they allowed it to continue to grow and kept crescendoing their life. Those were the few people that were going to become financially independent because they deferred gratification and let money work for them and compound, where the other people immediately bought lifestyle, consumables that depreciated, and they said they want to be financially independent, and they actually believed that was true. But the fact is their actual values, which determine their destiny financially, that's not what's true. So they think, oh, I sabotaged again. I had this great opportunity and I sabotaged again. But anytime you think you're sabotaging, it's because you have an expectation to live in somebody else's values or to live in your lower values, not your highest value. You don't sabotage when you live congruently by your highest value. If I love teaching. If I fill my day with teaching, I don't sabotage. If I try to open up a cupcake manufacturing and delivery service, I would end up looking like I'm sabotaging because I don't drive and I don't cook. I delegate. So if I have a goal that's not matching who I really am, I'm designed not to fulfill it and to procrastinate, to hesitate and frustrate because it's not me. But I don't procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate on what's really important to me, where my ontological identity is, which is my highest value is. You can count on me to be teaching, can't count on me cooking, can't count on me driving, can't count on me to be socializing. Not my highest priority.
So now you've reached there. You know what your highest priorities are, your values are, and you're living by it. But there would have been a time, let's say 30, 40 years or even 50 years ago, where you were in the process of getting there. When you were in the process of getting there, were there moments where you used to get distracted or deviated while you were even teaching?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
When I first started my journey, I was 17. I was 17 years old and I had a dream and vision to overcome my learning problem because I had a speech impediment and a reading impediment, all kind of stuff. I was told I would never be able to read, write, communicate, never amount to thing, never go very far in life when I was in first grade. I lived on the streets. I was a street kid as a teenager. And at 17, I met a teacher who inspired me to believe I could someday become intelligent, learn how to read and speak properly. But I had that dream and I wanted to travel the world. And so that hasn't changed. I've just been working on it. But along the way, sure, there's been moments when I question myself, can I do this? Can I do that? Sometimes I get distracted by things I thought would get me there or thought would get me there quicker. Absolutely. And eventually you go through enough of those things and find out that those distractions are incomplete awarenesses. And you finally realize that those lopsided perceptions are incomplete awarenesses. Slowly but surely you figure things out as you go. What I knew at 18 is different than what I know now. And it compared to the infinity of what I don't know, it's a small growth, tiny growth. But for my life, I'm grateful for it because I have a better understanding of who I am and what's priority to me at this stage of my life than I did when I was a teenager.
That's brilliant. And it also gives me a lot of reassurance because sometimes when I go back and forth, there is a part of me that beats myself up saying, no, you told yourself you're going to be doing this and all of that. But now I understand it's a journey for me to get there. And like how you said, while I can accept both aspects of me and say I'm still progressing, the journey becomes way more easier than what it is at this point of time.
But let me emphasize something. You may be assuming I got there. I don't assume it's done. It's not a destination. It's a journey. We're all in the journey. Because otherwise you assume you'll compare yourself thinking I've got there and you haven't. We're just on a journey together. Otherwise you're going to think, well, he's got it. He's got it figured out. I did that. I got to share this funny one. When I was 18 years old, my parents got me some books when I finally moved home to try to learn how to read and bought me a book on power of positive thinking. And I tried to be positive. No matter what I did, I kept having negative thoughts. And I kept thinking, what's wrong with me? I keep having negative thoughts. And so I get more and more books trying to be positive, more and more books trying to be positive. And eventually I said, I'm not getting it from the book. Something's not right. And I'm going to go to live seminars and meet these people that know what they're doing. And then I'd go and meet these people that I thought were positive, Zig Ziglar and Norman Vincent Peale and, Earl Nightingale and all these people in the self-help movement. And when I got to meet them, I found out they weren't positive. They were just human beings. And I was under the illusion that they had arrived. They had figured it out. They had gotten there. But when I actually got to meet them and I was friends with these people, I found out that they were just human beings just like me with both sides, positive and negatives. And that was a bit shattering of my myth, the myth that I was going to get there and I was going to be one-sided someday. So, beware, because otherwise you'll think that there's a destination, that it's finalized and you made it. That happens on the enlightenment movement. I'm now enlightened. My enlightenment happened on this day. No, if you think you're enlightened, you're ignorant. Because no matter how much you don't know but what you know. And to think you're done and you're not continuing to growing, it's much wiser to be humble and to continue to grow than it is to think that you've arrived somewhere. So I don't want to give the impression that I've arrived and now I'm all together and everything else. I'm a human being. And I have my buttons sometimes at things that I've oversighted and I react. When I get on an airline and they say, well, somehow we don't find your ticket and we it's overbooked and you won't be able to fly. I don't go, thank you. I say, can I talk to your supervisor? Because I got a first class ticket and here's my confirmation number. I'll be glad to pay to get somebody else off. Thank you. But I've got a big convention I'm speaking on. And either that or get me a private jet or something. But let's get to this location. Let's solve this problem. And I will try every strategy I can to try to solve my issue. So I'm just a human being. I don't have a desire to be something more than a human being, because if I do, I set myself up for defeat.
Okay, if that is the case, if I'm looking at you and I'm feeling extremely inspired, what is it telling me about myself?
That what you see in me, you have inside you. And the thing you love in me is the thing you love in you. And I'm just reflecting the part that you're seeing of yourself. That's all. When we resent somebody, it reminds us of the part we're ashamed of in ourselves that they're bringing out, but we're too proud to admit it. When we admire something in somebody, it's the thing that we have within ourselves, but we're too humble to admit it. When we see something we love in somebody, it's because we have an expression of love and it's reminding us of what we're inspired about our lives. So we're all reflections in that respect. But I find that when you point your finger out somebody else, it's just a reflection of us. It's just us. So if you have some appreciation or whatever of some things I do, it's because inside you already that what I'm saying you have. You already know it, or you couldn't have that response.
So, does it mean the entire world is just reflecting back to us parts of ourselves to make us aware
Yes,
of ourselves?
yes, that's it. There was a quote about 2,000 years ago. It was in a Christian New Testament text called Romans 2:1. And the text basically says, beware of judging. For who you judge, whatever you judge, you do the same thing. Now, I've been doing the breakthrough experience and having people identify what they resent in somebody, for instance, or infatuate. And I have them go in and look at where they do it. And I've taken about 150,000 people through that. And I've yet to find somebody that couldn't find whatever they saw in others that they admired or despised. It was a reflection of them. And the only reason why we reacted to them is because we were too proud or too humble to admit it within ourselves. But once we honor both sides of ourselves and not try to get rid of half of ourselves, instead of having our buttons pushed by other people, we get to realize that they're just reflections of us. And we get to have more to love within them and us.
That's so profound. Dr. Demartini, what would your final message be for everybody who's watching this podcast today?
Well, this is my final one, so this is the end of my life.
Of this podcast.
The magnificence of who you actually are, with all the polarities, is far greater than any fantasy you'll impose on yourself. So don't compare yourself to other people and put people on pedestals or pits. Have her self-reflective enough to know that whatever we see in others, you have within you. When you can love them for who they are, you get to love you for who you are. Because anytime we judge somebody on the outside, we judge another part of ourselves on the inside. And anytime we exaggerate or minimize them, we minimize or exaggerate us. And both are imposters. So the magnificence of who you are, which is all the above, nothing's missing at the level of your soul. Things only appear to be missing at the level of your senses. And the only thing that appears to be missing are the things you're too proud or too humble to admit that you see in others inside yourself. If you do that and honor that and only compare your actions to your own highest values, you'll have more to be grateful for, more grace in your life. And you'll then be taken to new levels of turmoil to grow some more.
Thank you so much. I met you first in 2019 in Hyderabad. We did a 1 full day session. And then we did a 1 full day session in 2020 during COVID. And then 2 days of session in Chennai again this year. My life has changed so much because of you. I will forever be very, very grateful to you, your teachings, and your presence. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be on your lovely show and for the lovely questions and for our reflections. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Demartini. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. I can say the same.
Thank you. That was such a great conversation. I mean, I thoroughly loved it.
Thank you. I felt the same way.
Thank you. And I will see you very soon in one of your sessions again.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.